For those of you here looking for me installing the brakes, you'll wonder why I'm at the lathe. Well, I did something stupid again. When I sold the front subframe of the car, I went ahead and threw the vacuum brake booster in there with it without realizing that I needed to take the little fitting that goes from the push rod from the master brake booster to the pedal. So I could either buy a kit that has all that stuff in it just to get that one little piece, or I could make something on the lathe. So here I am. So basically what I need to do is make a little fitting that'll thread onto the Willwood manual master cylinder, and then it'll slip over the little nub on the brake pedal. And there's my not to scale drawing. So that's what we're going to try to make on the lathe. You'll notice that there's a little milling involved. I do have a little mill set up for the lathe, so we're going to give that a try. It's not the best, but maybe it will work. Alright, I just drilled and tapped the end here that's going to go into the push rod. Just a quick note on process. I used the center drill in the tailstock here to center the hole, and I used a smaller drill bit, and then I used the appropriate size drill bit for a 5/16 24, which is a fine thread. So this is a letter I drill bit. And then what you saw me do is I used the tap. And if you haven't noticed, on taps they've got a little hole in the back. So what's that for? It's so you can center it. So what I did is I put a little live center in the tailstock and used the live center to keep this aligned as I was starting the tap. That makes sure that everything goes straight in. And once it was kind of a few threads in, I just took this out of the way and ran it all the way down. I had to be a little careful because this is a blind tap, so I didn't want to break anything off. So going forward a half turn, back a quarter, forward a half turn, back a quarter, and then at the end, I just used some silicone lubricant on the little with the nozzle on it to flow down in there, just to kind of like liberate any chips and stuff that may be down in there. You can't really ever get it all, but getting the most will be good. So now I'll take it out, cut it to length, flip it around, and machine the other side. Alright, so I'm gonna go ahead and convert this thing into a poor man's mill. I've got right here is a drawbar for the lathe. What it goes in is the headstock. It's got these threads right here. And essentially what you do is you take the collet adapter. I've got this thread protector on there right now. Got the collet adapter. Just lightly tap it in there. Slide the drawbar down there. What I've got here is a collet, correct size for the end mill. And so what I'm going to do is just slide this in here, try to mate those threads up, and then I spin the drawbar down like so. Yep, seems to have caught. And now when you spin the drawbar, it's going to draw that collet into the collet adapter and hopefully tighten this down and make it a nice round and concentric pattern. So we're going to drop that sucker in there, tighten it down a little bit. And then should be nice and centered. Go ahead and lock this back gears and tighten it down a little bit. And nice and tight. Alright, next up we get the piece in the milling clamp. So to set this up, you'll start to see why it's such a pain in the butt to mill anything in the lathe. First of all, this milling head is pretty, or this milling clamp is pretty small, so this is about as big of a piece as I can do. What I need to do is take the end mill and slice this edge off and then rotate it 180 and do the same thing on the other side to allow this fitting to slide past the blade of the brake pedal arm. And so you got to get everything straight. So what I'm doing right here is tramming this. I've got the piece clamped down on this mill, And then what I did is this crank cranks this clamp up and down. So I've basically put my dial indicator right on the piece, and I turn this dial up and down until the indicator stops moving in one direction and starts going in the other direction. And that means that I have it on the tangent, on the absolute furthest out edge right here. And then once it's there, what I do is I run this in and out. So I've got it where my cut starts, and then I run it in, and I'm looking for the dial indicator to move. If it shifts in one direction, that means the whole mill head is cocked one way. So I got it close using the angle marks down here, but now that it's right on, I've gone through and kind of tapped it with a dead blow just lightly to get everything in adjustment, and now I've got it where you can't really see the dial indicator from the camera, but it's within a thousandths all the way across, which is way more accurate than we need to be. So then basically what I'm going to have to do is remove the dial indicator, bring this all the way in, and because I don't have a very long or a very large end mill, I'm going to kind of have to take little passes. I'm going to have to move it in from this end, cut down, and then shift everything over a little bit more, then cut down, then shift everything, then cut down, and just take little bites. Now obviously milling in a lathe isn't ideal, so little cuts at a time is going to be what it has to do. So it's going to take me a while to get through this whole thing. But let's give it a try. Here's one side finished. I was being really conservative with my passes. I was only taking up about 50 thou every cut, just because this whole thing is not very rigid like a real mill. So it took me about 40 passes to get this far. But anyways, I'm not here trying to make money. So really interesting though point is, because things aren't very rigid, there's actually this really cool kind of very light, interesting texture on this, and it's because as I was turning the crank to move the Z-axis on the mill, I was actually flexing everything just slightly, and so the end mill was creating these really repetitive patterns. And you know, aside from looking cool, I mean, it's horrible machining practice, but because this face is going to be rubbing against the little blade, the metal blade that holds the brake pad, it actually isn't a bad thing. I can just swipe some grease on this, and these little pockets will actually hold the grease. So not intended, looks pretty cool. Just thought I'd point out another reason why you shouldn't do any mill work on a lathe. So now I'm going to go ahead and flip it over 180, and how I'm going to make sure that both sides are parallel is I'm going to take my 1, 2, 3 block here and put it right on the way, which should be very flat and level, and then push it up, and I can see that yes indeed what I did cut was very flat and level. So I'll rotate it 180, and then I'll move the block to the other side and use the same technique to get it all aligned. All right, here it is all done. See, I milled both sides. I went ahead and drilled the hole. This is the pin that will attach to the brake lever arm, and in the last clip I actually meant to say brake pedal, not brake pad, but anyways, slightly different than the original design. I thought I was going to have a large enough end mill so that I could bring it down and just cut it like this, which would have left a nice little chamfer right there. But because I did not, I had to come in and basically do this right here, and so that left this nice sharp face. Now, I agonized over whether to make this out of aluminum, which would have made the machining a lot easier, or steel, and I ended up going with steel because it's going to be rubbing here. When you press the brake pedal, it's going to rub, and I didn't want the aluminum to wallow out here over time and make sloppy brake feel. I probably should have just made it out of aluminum and then pressed a bushing in there or something, but oh well. So, and then I also screwed up here because I made it 5/16 24, which is actually the size for the clutch master cylinder. This is a 3/8 24, so luckily, no harm, no foul. I was able to just make that a little bit larger. And so now how this is going to work is it just spins right on there. It should be pretty close to the original dimensions, so I'm hoping that when this all bolts into the car, I'll have the right range of adjustability, so that's going to bolt right up. So let's move on to the rotors and the calipers. You know what? Scratch that. You good people have been waiting long enough for a new video, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it, ship it, print it, and then we'll make installing the brake kit itself a whole nother video next time. Just wanted to make a point. I ended up having to making a little radius on this edge on the bench grinder. There's a little fitment on the brake lever arm, which is where the button sits to allow it to turn the brake lights on. So I just nipped that down, and now it works perfectly. In fact, all the dimensions worked out great. This is threaded on halfway, and when I bolted it in the car to check it out, everything fit perfectly. Did not even have to adjust it. So if you want to spend hours and hours making your own $2 part, let me know and I can send you the dimensions.